and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to the United Nations. My name is Juan Carlos Brandt, and on behalf of the Department of Public Information, I'm delighted to welcome you all to this press conference that is being hosted by the Permanent Mission of Iceland to the United Nations and by the Golden Hat Foundation. We are delighted to do so at this particular day where the international community observes World Autism Awareness Day. 5 years ago, this day was created by a resolution of the United Nations General Assembly. And since then, the mandate of that resolution, which is to create awareness about the condition of autism throughout the world, has been growing exponentially. And there are now countries all throughout the world that are involved in activities that are designed to precisely call attention to this condition that affects so many millions of individuals. Today, as I said, the Mission of Iceland has decided to sponsor this, and we are delighted to introduce to all of you the First Lady of that country, Ms. Dorrit Musayev, who is going to address you and is going to have some brief remarks. Madam.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming here today. Thank you, Margaret, for giving birth to Kelly, and for having the courage to make this movie, for not taking no for an answer. I know only too well how many obstacles were in your way and how hard this was. But had you not done so, I would have been unable to thank Kate Winslet for so beautifully and generously agreeing to narrate the movie, and then going on to found the Golden Hat Foundation. The foundation aims to raise awareness for the millions and millions of kids and grown-ups who are affected by non-verbal autism. I think everybody in this room and many people here on the stage are much more capable than I am to tell you more about it, so I will hand the stage over to them. Thank you.
Many thanks, Ms. Musayev, for your words. I'd like to introduce the person that co-wrote the book with Kate Winslet, Margaret Elixtoftir, who is going to make some remarks so that you know what to expect after this. After Margaret makes some brief remarks, we're going to have a group of distinguished panelists who will address the issue of non-verbal autism from their different perspectives and from their particular specialty and knowledge from different universities and centers of learning in the United States. Margaret, you have the floor.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. Good afternoon. It's so good to see all of you here. It's such an honor for the Golden Hat Foundation to work in conjunction with the United Nations to host the World Autism Awareness Day. Only 5 years after the General Assembly unanimously adopted a resolution designating this special day on April of each year, April the 2nd of each year, as you know. The Golden Hat Foundation was established by the Academy Award-winning actress Kate Winslet and myself to help those with autism overcome the barriers that are currently placed upon them and help them achieve their fullest potential. We are honored to bring you today this amazing panel of guest researchers in the area of nonverbal autism. I'd like to take this opportunity also to tell you a little bit about the Golden Hat Foundation First Project. This is our book, The Golden Hat Talking Back to Autism, which was published just this week and is available in bookstores today. This book was Kate Winslet's idea and brainchild to send her favorite beaten-up trilby hat to as many well-known people as she could track down and ask them to photograph themselves wearing it. We would then make a book of the self-portraits along with the poetry written by my son Kelly, who has severe nonverbal autism, to raise money for our new foundation. The namesake of our foundation and our book comes from one of Kelly's poems called The Golden Hat. This boy had a golden hat. The hat was magical. It could talk. The boy did not have any voice. He had autism. His hat was always with him. His hat was lost one day. Now he had no way of telling them his stories. His mom and dad became sad. They taught him spelling on a letterboard. It was hard. Kelly, my son, is nonverbal. He communicates by pointing on a letterboard. And it is hard. It's still hard. We've been training him for 3 years. We train him every day. It's still hard. But it's a breakthrough. Because now we can hear his inner voice, his personality, his individuality. Kate went on a mission to share the story with some of the world's most famous people, posing the question, what is important for you to express? Their unique quotes and intimate self-portraits make this truly a one-of-a-kind book. Some of the celebrities included in the book are Christina Aguilera, Kobe Bryant, George Clooney, Leonardo DiCaprio, Zac Efron, Ricky Gervais, Tom Hanks, Rosie O'Donnell, and the list goes on and on and on. And we are just so grateful that all these celebrities are giving voice to those who don't have one. For me, The Golden Hat is much more than a book. It's a passion project that came to life through 100 top celebrities and a one very well-traveled hat. It reminds us that we are all equal, from the biggest Hollywood star to the quietest kids in school, like the non-verbal kids, and that we all want the same thing. We want to be heard, we want to be respected and acknowledged as intellectual human beings with our own dreams and desires, like everyone else in this room. We are not asking for anything more or anything less. The Golden Hat Foundation goal is simple, to honor intelligence. With projects like this book, we can show that these individuals are intellectually capable. And when given effective means to communicate and an academic education, not just life skills, as most are just receiving now. In this way, they can become a contributing citizens in our society, an inclusive member and part of this world. And remember, they are part of this world, so let's welcome them. The Golden Hat Foundation would like to thank Dr. Margaret Baumann, Dr. April Benasik, I hope I pronounced your last name, okay, Dr. John Connolly for graciously giving the time to be here today. Their dedication toward those with nonverbal autism is unprecedented, and we are proud to have them participate in today's briefing. Now I would like to introduce Portia Iversen, who on behalf of the Golden Hat Foundation will lead our distinguished panel during the press briefing. Portia is a mother of 19-year-old Dov Siestak, who has a nonverbal autism, and her efforts have made her renowned for her advocacy in nonverbal autism. Portia, you are the greatest. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for coming today, and I'm feeling very emotional right now because I realize that, you know, I'm in a room with a group of people whose goal and hearts are the same as mine, to help people with nonverbal autism or people with autism who cannot communicate. Of course, all people with autism. And I think doing it on this day is so fitting because, as Juan Carlos stated, the United Nations had the mandate to create more awareness about autism. And what we're here to tell you today is that 50% of the people who have autism, there's very little awareness of them. So I'm going to try to cover a lot in my 15 minutes, so forgive me if I race through a few things. The boy on the left is my son at age 9, just before he started to be able to communicate. And the boy on the right, so my son's name is Dove, and the boy on the right's name is Tito. And I am going to give you a tiny little flash of history, of my own history, because it very much relates to what we're talking about here today. I have to make it personal, so here is Dove at about age 2. Here he is at about age 5. My husband, John Shestak, and I started the Cure Autism Now Foundation 17 years ago. Hard to believe. In 1995, when our son was 3 years old, he had very severe autism. By the age of 3, therapists were telling us they didn't want to see him any longer because they had more promising patients on their waiting lists. There seemed to be very little hope, and we got very involved in promoting research in autism. And at the time, it was all new. And people were saying, and these are the ideas I want to put across today, people were saying 17 years ago, when we came to the government and we said, why aren't you doing autism research? Why is there less than $5 million a year going to it? And the answer was basically, nothing can be done to help these kids. They're too severe, they're too hard to work with, and there's really nothing we can do. So autism awareness has changed all that, along with funding of research and so on, and I'm going to show you. This is the gene bank we started in 1997, collecting families who had 1 or more children with autism, and this has absolutely probably been the single thing we did that sped up the field the most, because people all over the world could start having samples to work with. In 2000, we started the International Meeting for Autism Research, the first and only international meeting for autism research. But here's a little historical fact that you won't find in the books. In 2001, I was told that there was a boy in India named Tito who seemed very low functioning behaviorally, could not speak, but could type, and that he had an IQ of 185. So this is the first time I ever heard any suggestion that someone like my son, who nobody seemed to be able to help, he was called a non-responder, that there might be something hidden inside him. Maybe or maybe not, but this was the first time I ever heard of it. So this is Tito, and this is his mother, Soma, and she had spent many years teaching him how to communicate through pointing and typing. I convinced our organization to bring them to the United States, and they kindly came over. The first thing we did was test Tito so that nobody would say, oh, he's not really autistic. He passed every diagnostic criteria. He proceeded for 2 years to visit, and willingly and helpfully, he and his mother, we went around the country to see different neuroscientists, because he was telling us what it was like to be a nonverbal autistic person. And if you can imagine, we had really never heard from anybody before about what that was like, what was their mind like. He was telling us things like he couldn't concentrate on seeing something and hearing it at the same time. And these scientists were checking it all out with all their various means of testing that they have, and showing how his brain was working. Question, and I'm racing along, but you can imagine what I was thinking was, okay, we've got the kid who looks totally mentally retarded and can't talk, but he's got a good IQ. He is autistic, so it is possible. The next big question is he 1 in a million? Well, within 6 months, we finally dared to have Soma start working with my son. We always have been taught that, if you hadn't started from a very young age, the child would not be able to learn these things. And within a matter of about 6 weeks, he began to start to point, and he began to start to communicate, and we discovered that he did already know how to read. He had receptive language. I asked him, one of the first questions I asked my son Dove was, what have you been doing all these years? And he typed this word out to me, listening. He was 9. Soma volunteered for the next 1.5 or 2 years at his school, and many of the children in his class began to be able to communicate. Now, I felt a tremendous responsibility. Just being who I am, a door had opened. I had seen that, not only wasn't Tito 1 in a million, not only could my son now have a form of communication and others in his classroom, so obviously there had to be a lot more. And I was really worried that if Soma went back to India and this whole thing sort of blew over as an anomaly, what would happen? Would all the other children who couldn't speak never have a chance to learn how? So I did the best thing I could at the time, which was I wrote this book, chronicling my experience of my son starting to communicate and finding out that he had normal intelligence at the age of 9. The book was translated into 10 languages, and I've been to several of these countries giving workshops. People naturally all over the world are very interested in this story and how to try to help their child that everybody says can't be helped and is a non-responder. So how big a problem is the nonverbal autism problem? We talk about awareness. I'm talking today about approximately 50% of people with autism. And there isn't even a word for these people, because when you say nonverbal, what does it mean? And that's exactly how it was when we came into autism 17 years ago. What was autism? Was everyone with autism mentally retarded? Was it a bunch of syndromes? Was it Fragile X? Nobody really had good way of defining it. And that's very important, because it means you don't know how to look and see how many people there are. You don't know how to show that you've included them in research. You don't know how to aim interventions at them that are being developed, or educational strategies. So actually defining what you're talking about is the first step in being able to do something to help these people. We include those who cannot physically speak or cannot be understood, and also those who can speak but cannot use their voice to communicate. There are many children, as anyone involved in autism knows, who have a voice that can speak, but they cannot use it to communicate. So I'm talking about the half, 50% of the autism population that cannot communicate. So to put it into perspective very quickly, everybody can do this math, but we're talking about 33.5 million people who have this, for lack of better terms, low functioning or nonverbal autism. And we've got these new figures now of how common autism is. So if 1 in every 88 has autism, that means 1 in every 176 of the children in America have low functioning nonverbal autism. So this means it's a huge problem. If every 20 minutes one is diagnosed with autism, then every 40 minutes we're getting one of these children, or half, who cannot communicate. We're not talking about a temporary condition. This is lifelong lack of communication. And it isn't that there's nothing we can do about it, it's that nothing has been done or is being done about it. There's very little being done. There are a few people, such as the people you're going to hear from today after me, who are working on it, but literally almost no one. So I want to make a little comparison here. When our son was 3 and we started Cure Autism Now, this was the news. The news was that autism was the fastest growing developmental disability. Well, in that case, so is nonverbal autism. The news was less than $5 million a year back then was being spent on autism research. As a matter of fact, we couldn't even find out really. We had to call the accounting agency of all the National Institutes of Health to even try to put a number together. Nobody really even knew. Exactly the same thing is true today, 17 years later, for 50% of people with autism, the nonverbal population. There were only a dozen or so mainstream scientists focusing on autism 17 years ago. We needed to recruit people into the field. Today, for nonverbal people with autism, low functioning, exact same thing is true. There's probably about a dozen people who are actively engaged in trying to figure something out for them. And I'm talking about biological, I'm talking about education, I'm talking about behavioral interventions, or even defining what the population is. There's almost no scientific research underway. There's no standardized diagnosis to distinguish between mental retardation, numerous genetic syndromes, and autism. That's how it was 17 years ago for autism, exactly how it is today for nonverbal autism. Almost no therapeutic interventions existed 17 years ago, and almost none were being developed. Almost nothing was known of how to educate children with autism or how to improve their ability to communicate 17 years ago. 100% true today for the half of autism. So I have it here, I'm not going to read it over again, but 2012 State of Autism, everything that was true 17 years ago for autism is still true for the lower functioning half. Now I want to say one thing, which is that, why is that true? And if we think about it, just think about the history of research. Medical research used to just be for white men. And then we were going to extrapolate to women and minorities and children. And then eventually, well, maybe we better also do research on women. And then we did minorities. Then we did children. And along the way, we picked up doing research with the mentally ill. The reason, if you ask a scientist or a government agency or even a private funding agency for autism research why they're not doing more, if anything, for low-functioning nonverbal autism, they'll tell you, oh, that's the lower half of the spectrum. they're too hard to work with, they're not cooperative, they're not compliant. Once we figure it out for the higher functioning half, we're going to get to that half. Well, it's unacceptable, and that's really what I'm here to say today, is you can't say you're going to do the right thing and then only do it for half the people. And 17 years have passed now, and this has got to become an issue, not just, oh, when we get around to it, or oh, they're too hard to work with, or when we figure all that out. No, now they're alive. They're adults with nonverbal autism. There's teenagers, there's children, and there's a lot of them. The numbers, the statistics you see for autism, half of those people are the people I'm talking about today. So I'm just going to very quickly take you through this. The model for autism for years has been that it is one thing or a few things, and it ranges from mild to severe. The cutoff is whether or not you can communicate, and that falls somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. And the half that can't communicate, and particularly those who cannot physically speak, have been thought of as the hardest hit. We basically have to throw that model out from a scientific standpoint. The studies that have come out since starting in about 2005 and really increasing around 2007 in genetics, 2007 was the big year, are showing us that there are going to be many causes of autism. There will be large groups that fall under individual categories. So it's not that there will 100 people, 100 kinds of autism, but there will be many kinds, and there's absolutely no scientific reason to think that this isn't going to be true of the more severe half. So if we look at the higher functioning half of autism and we say, okay, there's many kinds of autism within that group, and we expect all kinds of abilities in that group. We can't go over to the other half and just because they can't talk or they can't communicate say that they're all the same thing, they all have mental retardation and no cognitive potential, and that they're too hard to work with. We just can't do it anymore. Scientifically speaking, it makes no sense to be so simplistic about it. We have to realize that the half of the spectrum that can't communicate is just as complicated as the other half. And there are going to be people in there with normal cognitive abilities as well as people with mental retardation. And we need to investigate. Now I'm just giving you a picture here for a visual of a variety of nonverbal children, and all these children here actually cannot talk and are considered to have severe autism. Each of them is sitting either alone or with a person, and with a device you're seeing iPads, which I believe is going to be the future of communication for this group. They seem to do really well with them. You're seeing a paper letterboard, a whiteboard, and very dark in the upper and right-hand corner is a light writer, which is a speech device, typing device. You're seeing kids who people say cannot be tested and cannot comply, and here they are because they have a means of communication and have had some training to be able to point and to type, and you can see that they could be involved. To think that it's all going, it's going to tell you a lot of times, from low to high functioning, starting with mental retardation and going up to normal intelligence is a wrong model. We've got things scattered all throughout the spectrum. So we do need to rethink the model. These are the 4 studies I could find involving trying to determine cognitive ability in nonverbal or low-functioning people. I could find 4. Okay? They're all good studies, but my God, we need to be doing more. Autism Speaks in 2008-2009 had 2 meetings. They used to have an initiative called Characterizing Cognition in Nonverbal Autism. And I'm not going to read this aloud to you, but basically it's saying the same thing. You know, cases have been coming up over and over through the years of nonverbal people who have normal cognitive ability, and we need to keep looking for that. These were the 3 studies that were funded out of that initiative. 2 of the people are here today. You'll be hearing about their work. Connie Castries at UCLA couldn't be here today, and you'll also be hearing from Margaret Bauman, who has been faithfully working with the nonverbal population for many years and has been an advocate of theirs and published one of the first case histories showing a nonverbal boy who was able to communicate through typing. I'm on the National Institute of Mental Health Advisory Council, and through my work there was able to get the first ever workshop focusing on nonverbal autism going at NIH. These slides will all be on the UN website, so you don't have to write this down, but if you wanted to see a summary, a detailed summary of that meeting, you could go there. And there was a call for projects. I have to be very frank. The fact that this happened is wonderful. The fact that it happened 2 years ago and nothing else has happened is terrible. The fact that there was an RFA is wonderful. The fact that it funded fewer than 6 studies for people already doing autism research by including some people who are nonverbal in their studies is not what I had hoped for, although it's better than nothing. The nonverbal people need to be included in studies as well as studied themselves. So just to be perfectly honest, on the one hand, this is a huge success story of getting it done. On the other hand, it's nowhere near what we need to be doing. Put this in here. I thought there might be a parent or two in the audience or watching it on the web, and I put that in there just to put my website because parents inevitably ask me, well, I have a nonverbal child, how do I get them started pointing? How do I get them started? I wrote a manual. Now it needs to be updated because of the iPad. That's good news, and I'm going to do that soon. But it gives you the basic idea of how to get a kid started, and I put it there for anyone who would ask that question. That's my son Dove. That was shortly before he started communicating. Now I know this is kind of a unfair emotional heartstring puller, but I think these pictures really tell a story. You can see his isolation and all the people trying to connect with him. And here he is, a year or two later on his birthday, and just so much more in this world and connected because people know he can understand everything we're saying. And that we're gonna, he'll go get a haircut, he'll go to the dentist, he'll get a blood draw. He knows no one's gonna pull a surprise on him, and everybody realizes he's listening, he understands, and we want his input. And so it makes obviously a huge difference. We all like to have that, right? Okay. And there he is with his sister and brother and another friend. Allows him to interact with the kids. Now, this is another visual demonstration. This is what you're up against. And this kid may actually, this is Dove, but a kid like this could actually become very distraught and even aggressive maybe if you tried to stop him from playing with his beads or whatever he's doing. And that's why people think, oh, well, how can they be included in research? However, look at this, same person, right? Joint attention, focusing together, shared world. So these are just visual demonstrations that we can no longer accept federally funded programs or privately funded programs or anything across the board saying that we're not ready yet to deal with this group. I will say access to communication is a basic right and it's a human rights issue. It really is. And what can you do personally is please be my guest. Get online, get on email, or call up someone at the National Institutes of Health, the Children's Health Institute, mental health, neurology, Deafness and Hearing Institute, and ask them, what are they doing in the way of research for nonverbal or low-functioning autism, the half of the spectrum that can't communicate? And don't take a general answer. Ask for specifics. What are the studies they're funding? What programs do they have? And write it down and blog about it, because I'm telling you, they're not doing anything. Ask private foundations as well. Autism Speaks is genius at getting awareness for autism. And they have made some small efforts towards this group, but ask them. Don't take, oh yeah, we're doing something. Find out, what are the studies they're funding? What are the initiatives and programs they have for this group? Don't forget, it's half the population. Ending on a personal note is, don't judge a book by its cover. When you see someone acting real crazy and they can't talk, say hello to them. They may understand you. They probably do understand you. I'm pretty sure they understand you. So remember that these people, they're living with a disorder where they not only can't speak, but also can't stop doing a lot of types of behaviors. Their families can be very, very isolated. So it's very meaningful if you interact with the nonverbal person, and if you include their family and that person socially, because these families have become very isolated. I speak from personal experience. Give to any nonprofit foundation you're going to give to. If you care about this half of the autism population, find out what they're doing for it and give to those foundations that are really doing something. And also, you know, I did touch on the biological interventions, behavioral interventions, educational approaches. All those things are important and need to be being worked on at the federal and private level. And lastly, I just want to say that I go to the Autism Speaks walks, and there will be 5,000 people, and there will be 7,000 people, and everybody has their autistic child with them. Half of them are nonverbal, low communicating, or low functioning, whatever you want to call it. Half of them are the non-communicating type of autism. I almost never see an iPad, a letterboard, or a light writer. I certainly don't see 50% of the kids having them. I see 5 out of 5,000 people. So this is my last thing I'm going to say here that I really want to emphasize, is that if you heard there was a country where there were hundreds of thousands of kids who were born unable to communicate, and they were in schools all throughout the country, all their life, and in institutions, and 99% did not have a communication device, had not received training to learn to communicate, and there were no programs to help them learn how to communicate, you would be shocked and say, what country is this? It sounds so primitive, right? How can we have a fancy school with a big special ed program, and all the low-functioning kids, they don't have an iPad, they don't have a light writer, they don't even have a piece of paper with the alphabet on it. And even at our own autism awareness rallies to raise funds in our walks, the kids don't have them. We have to start making the demand that these tools are made available to this population, all ages, children and adults. They can learn to use them, and not every kid will be, you know, a brilliant 185 IQ, but a lot of those kids will literally be locked into autism without the ability to communicate. Thank you for being here today.
My dream is to talk. Everyone desires some way to reach somebody.
Today I stand before you, a girl who has dreams, goals, expectations, and the ability to accomplish all of them. I have learned that just because you have a wall in front of you doesn't mean you can't knock it over.
Let me introduce quickly our speakers, and I'm going to start with Margaret Baumann, MD, who's the Associate Professor of Neurology at Harvard Medical School and Director of LADDERS, and she'll tell you what it is because I don't know. Please.
Thank you so much. It was really, truly an honor to be here today. And LADDERS stands for Learning and Developmental Disabilities Evaluation and Rehabilitation Services, which is why we don't say all of that. It is now the Lurie Center. It has changed its name, but it does very much the same thing. It's a one-stop shop that does, it's a multidisciplinary program for children, adolescents, and adults on the spectrum. But anyway, in any case, I'm delighted to be here today to talk to you about the nonverbal group. A lot of the data that you've already heard is on this slide. The slide apparently wasn't changed when the CDC came out with its new data, which is 1 in 88 that you heard from Portia. The estimated prevalence of nonverbal communicators is somewhere between 33 and 50%. Thus, as Portia's already pointed out, there are large numbers of the folks that we see every day who know language to get through their daily communication needs. Much of this has come through the assumptions that if you don't talk, you obviously have no cognitive ability, and these people are considered low functioning. And frankly, personally, I find that term offensive because I don't think we honestly know who is, quote, low functioning or not. Society's low expectations then fall into this group. So we don't really educate these children because we really don't feel like they really have the ability to be educated as we could, or we don't think out of the box to be able to try different approaches to educating them. And few, as Portia has pointed out, are involved in research studies, problems with the cooperation you've heard, but there's a real lack of our ability to measure or to diagnose these children or to find out how they really can communicate. We don't really have good, accurate tools to assess children who are nonverbal right now. It's a real problem, and I agree with Portia about research that needs to be developed to expand this effort. Of course, many of these people have been using these picture exchange communication systems up to this point. This is, for those many who may not know what that is, it's a series of icons that are used that are little Velcro strips, and kids carry them around in their book, and they line them by, I want a cookie, I want the bathroom, whatever. And though that's been reasonably effective for a while, as you saw that some of the children that Portia showed are using communication boards, and now with the advancing technology, we're using many, many, many more communication devices. And what's really happened is that, at least in our neck of the woods in Northeast, a lot of our children are being evaluated for communication devices, and there are many different kinds of devices. And it's not really a one-size-fits-all scenario. It's what works for which child when. And so it's extremely important that if we're going to use devices, as I think we should be using them, that we need to find out which of the children benefit from which device. And that may change as they grow and expand and develop the skills to use those devices. And I will tell you that since I've been using those devices, a lot of our children do use them. One of the concerns I have is the same as Portia's, which is if you need to use them functionally, you need to take them with you when you go to McDonald's, you need to take them with you to go to the ballpark or wherever, so that the kids can actually use them functionally. And I'd like to see devices get small enough, much like a cell phone, so that they can actually carry it with them all the time, and it's not some bulky thing that really gets in their way. And I'm seeing more and more of that now happening in our way, up our way. So what have we learned? We've learned that many autistic persons are not cognitively impaired. That was the former assumption. In fact, for many years I heard the term, or the data, that 75% of individuals on the autism spectrum are mentally retarded. That number is far too high, and I don't think we really know what that number is, but I'm shocked every day when I see a child using a device and realize how really bright they are. They've taught themselves to read, they've taught themselves math, they've taught themselves to spell. They're incredible at what they know. We've significantly underestimated this group. We need to study and understand the neurobiology mechanisms that limit expressive language. Where's the block? We don't have a clue. Need to better educate providers, caregivers, therapists, effective teaching methods, and use of technology. All of that. We need to change our attitudes. We need to seek meaningful employment and quality of life for our adults, who can still learn these skills, by the way. This is not just for children. This is for adolescents and adults. Take-home message is that although lacking in expressive language, many autistic persons are cognitively capable. Many are frustrated by their lack of communication, leading to behavior problems. If you cannot communicate and you've got something to say, that has to be one of the most frustrating things you can imagine. We need to hold our expectations to a higher standard. More research in this group is definitely needed, as you've already heard. We need more creativity in teaching approaches, expand our use of technology. As I said before, this is not a one-size-fits-all disorder. And last of all, we need to assume competency until proven otherwise. These kids are bright. Even if they can't tell you what they know, they really know a lot. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to ask April Benasich, a PhD, who has a very, very long list of titles here that if I go ahead, we're going to spend all afternoon here. So why don't you come here, April? And she's from Rutgers University, Newark, and director of the Carter Center for Neurocognitive Research. But there's other things before that. But please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'm going to put my camera on. I study early brain development in infants, primarily longitudinal prospective studies, and I was very interested in figuring out, for this particular population, how one could figure out what was in there. And this was the problem that was coached to all of us who had come to these meetings. What's in there and how can you figure it out? And everyone said, well, you know, you can't test these kids. They can't talk, they don't point, and we don't know what's in there. And I said, well, I test babies every day, and we don't know what's going on in there. And I've tested kids that have other problems where they can't speak, like holoprosencephaly, and they have motor problems. So can we use these same sorts of approaches to look and see what's happening inside of these children's heads? So this was a project to assess language comprehension and language processing speed in children with autism who are nonverbal or minimally verbal. And it's very difficult to assess these children when they don't talk, and if they have other interfering behaviors, which was another problem with these children. And so that you can't use a traditional evaluation. And again, everybody said this, but it bears repeating. You just don't know what their cognitive capacity is if they have little or no access to effective communication. And again, lack of expressive language does not necessarily indicate lack of receptive language abilities. And inability to speak does not mean low function. And so we used the expertise that we had in infants to develop a series of experiments that would allow us to look inside and see what was happening, to look at these nonverbal children. And we wanted to look at basically language comprehension. Can they comprehend what's going on in the world? And what is their capacity to understand both spoken and written language, as well as verbal, as well as visual images. And we wanted to also be able to assess whether they have the level of communication and knowledge to be able to use a communication system, because as Portia pointed out, many of these kids do not have those sorts of devices. They're not offered. So I'm going to tell you about just one of the tasks that we used. It was wrong button. It was a lexical semantic task that would tell us about their vocabulary and also tell them about word associations without an obligatory response. And I'm actually going to just show you what it is. And in order to get the children so that we could record their brain responses using EEG and ERP, evoked response potentials, basically averaging the EEG so we could see what was happening, time locked, we had to train the children. We had to desensitize them to the EEG net. So we would go into the home for 2 to 3 sessions and train them to wear the net using operant conditioning. And once we did, we would get them in there and we would test them. And it was actually easier than we thought it was going to be. And what we did, we used a paradigm where we showed them a picture, like a frog. And then after half a second, they heard either frog, which labeled the picture, or plane. There was another break, and then they heard a word that was primed by the word frog, so green or spoon, which is not. And this was the paradigm, one of the ones that we used. And we had 2 goals. We wanted to look at patterns in the signal that indicated whether they were differentiating these picture-word matches. And we had typically developing kids, and we knew what the brain looked like when it was doing this task. And we wanted to see just what types of information they were sensitive to, and look and see whether we could see a typical pattern or one that was deviant. And I'm not going to go through these data really, but what we found was that their early responses were found to be comparable to age-matched, typically developing children, so that this initial sensory response actually looked quite normal. And we were also able to see, the red line is the children with autistic spectrum disorder, that although they were similar in the beginning when they were processing, later on they were slower in processing. And they had better responses to words that matched the picture versus those that did not. And of course we had other paradigms. So basically what we found is that we could actually look at these children and see whether they were doing the initial processing and whether they went on to do additional processing. And interestingly, and this is an important slide, we were able to look at each of these kids individually, and this is one child, each of these is one child, and characterize how close they look to typical children. So we could look at these kids who were giving us a very good response that looked a lot like typical kids. These kids had that first peak that showed that they were processing sensorily and then not so much. And these kids, we weren't sure what was going on. And so in general, we can look at differences in processing at both the group and the individual levels. And many of them had more typical patterns, suggesting that they were understanding what we were telling them and understanding the word that labeled it. And combining these data with neuroimaging allows for developmental models. And so this is the take-home message. Although you need to train the child to wear the net, and it's a challenge to test these children, some of them took much longer than others, we can indeed develop procedures that allow us to look at what the cognitive development is in these children, and it allows interventions to be more closely matched to the child's cognitive level. This is my lab. And thank you for listening. And sorry to go
Hi, I'm John Connolly from Ontario, Canada, and I'll be quick. So I just want to thank various funding agencies, especially Autism Speaks, and I want to thank Portia Iversen, who got me into autism research, because originally I was basically doing research with brain-injured populations. I've been doing that for about 20 years, where these are criteria for the vegetative state. And one thing that everyone is taught in any sort of graduate program or medical program, or they should be, day one, is that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And yet, it seems as if everyone has forgotten that by day 3. So by the time they get their PhD or MD, they come out and they produce criteria like this that are based on behavioral markers, trying to make determinations of people who are behaviorally incapable. So there is a logic there that it defies belief, because apparently they never took a course in logic either. Now I have a slide here, or there is a video of a patient, but vegetative patients look the way they sound. They do not do anything. They fulfill all these criteria. Basically, what we did was we adapted, we started this work in the early 90s, we adapted neuropsychological tests that would have been used with these individuals if they had had any behavioral capacity whatsoever. We adapted them for computer presentation and simultaneous brain recordings. And we basically let the brain do the talking. Thus the name, I'll get fancy here and use a pointer, thus the name Neurovox. So we developed this technique that allowed the brain to do the talking, basically. And I wouldn't be wasting your time if it hadn't been successful. But what ERPs, these event-related potentials, allow you to do is to measure a whole range of cognitive functions without the necessity of relying on the person's ability to communicate in any fashion. These things are independent of overt behavior. You need not say, oh, that sentence made no sense. We can tell from your brain response. You need not say, I don't speak French. We can tell that you don't speak French. You should if you live in Canada, but you might not. So nonetheless, we can tell if that's the case by the nature of your brain response. And finally, the brain responses, as I said, can substitute for your inability to point or speak or do anything that is typical in responding to another person. And finally, because we do MRI research as well, the difference with ERPs are the inferential leap from what you see on the graph that, like April was just showing you, and what I'll show you in a second. The inferential leap from those waveforms to what you know they're doing is much smaller than with fMRI. I like fMRI, the pictures are great, but in terms of really understanding what's going on, I do think ERPs are superior. So this is very quickly a young man that was stabbed in the head, left in a vegetative state, diagnosed as such, and vegetative, not minimally conscious. He was absolutely vegetative. I was asked to test him. We presented him 2 types of sentences that very simply made sense. That's this one, and those that didn't. This is the sort of response you should see. Forget this 4 waveforms, just pretend you're seeing double. You have a waveform here that indicates the response to the scared cat ran up the apple. You show this sort of response. These downward responses, the responses to the sensible sentences. There's a very clear separation. And what we when we tested that young fellow that was having swallowing reflex problems, was strapped into his wheelchair because he could not maintain body posture, etc. When we tested him, he showed very nice separations, and about a month later his separations were even better. He was thoroughly comprehending what was going on around him, despite the fact that he had one eye sutured shut because it wouldn't blink, he had swallowing reflexes, etc., etc. I've been very fortunate working in Canada because he received the treatment that had initially been denied him. This is the 3rd patient we've seen in this sort of situation. Each one of those patients has, thank God, in terms of credibility, responded magnificently well to treatment. So this is another test. This is called the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test. This is a neuropsychological test that we've adapted. The way we've adapted it is you would see a picture like this and then hear a word bus or hear the word cat. In other words, related or unrelated. And the unappealing lime green waveform there is the response that you would show when you see that picture but hear the word cat. So again, that same separation. It's called an N400. It just refers to a semantic mismatch. It's recognizing that that wasn't correct. And you can see here at different levels of vocabulary, the responses get closer together because these individuals, these are undergraduate students, when we got to level 3, they did not know what the word pedagogue meant. They were first-year students. Hopefully they did by the time they graduated. But the point is, you can see a very clear response here. And I mention all of this because we then tested some autistic children. And again, it was Portia that said, what you're doing with brain injury, why don't you do it with nonverbal autism? So we did, thanks to Autism Speaks. And what you can see here is a control young man, 11 years old, showing lovely N400s to sentences that don't make sense in different parts of the head. Perfectly reasonable, very nice response. He is also showing a decent response, not overwhelming, but pretty good. N400s, very nice there. And that makes sense because this is more to the back of the head where this response is largest. It's distributed in that direction. So this child is an 11-year-old, typically developed child showing these very nice semantic comprehension responses. This is a young girl that came to us, nonverbal autism, low IQ. This is her ADOS. I have some ADIR if anybody wants to see those data. The point is she was classic nonverbal autism. Came with something of a parental warning because although it says low aggressive behavior here, she had knocked out the tooth of a therapist the week before, so we were prepared for her. She was a lovely little kid. She was actually not so bad to test. She was quite cooperative. And these are her responses to the sentences that do or don't make sense. That's called an N400. It's also called semantic comprehension. This is the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test. If we just jump to the back of the head where the response is dominant, that's also showing that when she saw the picture of the bus, heard the word cat, she recognized they did not semantically go together. So she's showing very nice responses. Here is a young boy, 14-year-old, nonverbal autism. He shows a very nice response to sentences, as you can see. He shows a very nice sensory response to the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test, but not much in the way of a response to the mismatching pictures. That's because I don't think he looked at the screen once. Unless we had a vice on his head, there was no way to make him look at the screen. So he was all over the place in terms of his gaze. So one could maybe correct that with goggles if he was willing to wear them. But the point is, he showed responses to sentences, and that was a good sign. And this is just to complete the picture, lest you think that everybody we see shows good responses. This is a young boy who failed to show any responses to the sentences that were reliably recorded. So it's not all good results, so to speak, in terms of positive. Some children really do seem to maybe not be functioning at a level that we wish they were functioning at. But these measures appear to be very sensitive. We know they're sensitive in acquired brain injury, be it stroke or trauma. We've also tested other groups, spastic quadriplegic cerebral palsy. We can make those differentiations. The technique is very, very useful, and we're finding it very useful in autism as well. And I will say thanks to the province of Ontario, who's just given us several $1 million. I say us, there are 27 of us. It's a very large grant and a very large group of people, but we're going to be pursuing this work along with genetics. So at any rate, this is a very quick snapshot of what's going on. I will refer back to some of the previous speakers and basically say that it is a case of human rights. Why are we making these assumptions of these people, whether they're brain injured or autistic? I can recommend a book called The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, or in the original Le Scaphandre et le Papillon by Jean-Dominique Bobet. It is a man who had a brainstem stroke. He wrote a book. And even then, most of the people in the hospital, except for the nurse that was writing the book with him, ignored him. It's something very human about us. It's not being unkind. It's just if you cannot communicate, you really cannot communicate. You cannot make that bridge. People will not meet you halfway. And so I think it's very important that these ERPs are very good. We can see responses in acquired brain injury and autism. But I think at this point, without the introduction of some sort of neuromonitoring methodology as a standard tool for assessment, I think you could say it's overdue. And without using it, I think at this point, it's bordering on malpractice. I think it's so reliable, it's sufficiently reliable, it's sufficiently clear-cut. The inferential leaps are tiny, frankly, especially with some of these methods, that to make it a pure behavioral assessment of somebody who is, by definition, behaviorally compromised, it makes no sense. So, thank you very much.
Thanks to John, to April, and to Margaret, and of course to Portia for her presentations. Those of you listening and in your offices, thank you for paying attention. And again, good afternoon to all of you, and see you tonight at the screening of Margaret's movie, in the Express Bar. You have received indications that you are indeed in the list, and so we welcome you all to come. Again, sponsored by the Golden Hat Foundation and the Permanent Mission of Iceland to the United Nations. Thank you very much.